The wedding reception was in full swing when Marvin Gaye disappeared. It was June 8, 1963, and Detroit's social elite had gathered to celebrate the marriage of Anna Gordy to the rising young singer. The ballroom at the Book Cadillac Hotel buzzed with congratulations and champagne toasts, but the groom was nowhere to be found. Anna, radiant in her white gown, kept glancing toward the empty space where her new husband should have been standing. Finally, Berry Gordy Jr., the founder of Motown Records and Anna's younger brother, went looking for him. He found Marvin in the men's restroom, staring at his reflection in the mirror. Still wearing his tuxedo, still perfectly groomed, but his eyes held something that Berry had never seen before. A kind of hollow recognition, as if Marvin was looking at a stranger. "You all right, man?" Berry asked, adjusting his own bow tie in the adjacent mirror. Marvin didn't answer immediately. He kept staring at himself, his hands gripping the marble edge of the sink. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Who am I now?" Berry laughed, thinking it was wedding day nerves. "You're Marvin Gaye, man. You're family now." But Marvin wasn't laughing. That question would haunt him for the next 14 years, through every album, every hit song, every moment of success that felt increasingly hollow. Who was he now? Was he still Marvin Gaye from Washington, D.C., the preacher's son with dreams of musical independence? Or had he become something else entirely? Anna Gordy's husband, Berry Gordy's brother-in-law, a piece on the Motown chessboard? He didn't know it yet, but that moment in the bathroom mirror was the beginning of the end of Marvin Gaye as a free man. The calculation behind love. To understand how Marvin found himself trapped in golden chains, you need to understand what marriage to Anna Gordy really meant in 1963. It wasn't just a union between two people who had fallen in love. It was a merger, a business arrangement disguised as romance, a decision that would determine not just Marvin's personal life, but the entire trajectory of his career. Anna Gordy was 17 years older than Marvin, a sophisticated woman who had already lived a full life by the time the 24-year-old singer caught her attention. She was divorced, had children from a previous marriage, and carried herself with the confidence of someone who belonged to Detroit's black aristocracy. The Gordy family wasn't just successful, they were powerful, connected, the kind of people who could open doors or slam them shut with a single phone call. For Marvin, who had grown up in a cramped house in Washington, D.C., with an abusive father and a family that lived paycheck to paycheck, the Gordy world was intoxicating. Here was money, influence, respectability. Here was everything he had dreamed of as a young man, singing in church choirs and amateur talent shows. But there was a price for admission to this world, and that price was his independence. The courtship between Marvin and Anna began in 1961, shortly after Marvin had signed with Motown as a session musician and backup singer. He was hungry, ambitious, desperate to prove himself in an industry that chewed up young black artists and spat them out. Anna was already established, already secure, moving through Motown's offices and social circles with an ease that Marvin could only watch and admire. Their relationship developed slowly, carefully. Anna was cautious about getting involved with one of her brother's artists, understanding the complications it could create. But Marvin was persistent, charming, and talented in ways that couldn't be ignored. He would write songs for her, sing to her over the phone, show up at her house with flowers and promises of devotion. What Anna saw in Marvin was potential, not just as an artist, but as a project. She could help shape him, guide his career, turn him into the sophisticated performer she believed he could become. What Marvin saw in Anna was access to the Gordy family, to resources and connections that could accelerate his career beyond anything he could achieve on his own. Neither of them fully understood what they were trading away. The golden cage takes shape. The wedding itself was a spectacle designed to announce Marvin's new status in Detroit society. The guest list read like a who's who of Motown royalty: Smokey Robinson, Diana Ross, Stevie Wonder, Martha Reeves. It was covered by the black press, photographed for Jet magazine, celebrated as a fairy tale romance between a rising star and a sophisticated older woman. But behind the glamour, the power dynamics were already shifting. The marriage made Marvin part of the Gordy inner circle. but it also made him dependent on their approval in ways he hadn't anticipated. Suddenly, his personal life and professional life were inseparable. His wife wasn't just his partner, she was his boss's sister. His in-laws weren't just family, they controlled his career. The first sign of what this would mean came during their honeymoon in Jamaica. Anna spent most of their time there on the phone with Berry, discussing Motown business, planning strategies for upcoming releases, managing crises back in Detroit. Marvin found himself sitting alone on the beach while his new wife conducted business that would directly affect his future, but from which he was excluded. "This is how it works," Anna explained when Marvin finally complained. "Family business stays in the family." The implication was clear. Despite being married to Anna, despite the ceremony and the rings and the public celebration, Marvin was not yet truly family. He was still an outsider, still someone who needed to prove his worth and loyalty. This realization created a psychological tension that would define the rest of Marvin's career. He was simultaneously inside and outside the power structure that controlled his life, close enough to see how decisions were made, but not close enough to influence them. Dependent on people who saw him as an asset rather than a person, the success that followed only made the cage more comfortable, not less confining. The price of protection. As Marvin's recording career began to flourish in the mid-1960s, the benefits of his marriage to Anna became apparent. His releases got priority treatment at Motown. His songs received better promotion, better distribution, better marketing support than artists who didn't have family connections. He was protected from some of the more exploitative practices that affected other Motown artists. But protection came with expectations. Anna took an active role in managing his career, making decisions about his image, his songs, his public appearances. She had opinions about everything: what he should wear, how he should style his hair, which interviews he should give, which social events he should attend. The process was gradual, so subtle that Marvin didn't fully recognize it at first. Anna's suggestions became guidance. Guidance became direction. Direction became control. She was helping him, she insisted. She was using her experience and connections to ensure his success. But each suggestion he accepted, each decision he deferred to her judgment, took him further away from his own artistic instincts. The hit songs came: Pride and Joy, Can I Get a Witness, How Sweet It Is to Be Loved by You. Each success reinforced the system, proved that Anna's approach was working. How could Marvin complain about being managed when the results were so obviously positive? But late at night, alone in the house they shared in Detroit's Boston Edison district, Marvin would sometimes sit at the piano and play melodies that Anna would never approve of. Darker songs, more complex songs, music that came from places inside him that he wasn't supposed to access anymore. He had become successful, but at the cost of losing touch with the part of himself that had made him want to make music in the first place. The golden cage was working exactly as designed. The unspoken rules, living as Berry Gordy's brother-in-law, meant navigating a complex web of unspoken rules and expectations that Marvin was never explicitly taught, but was expected to intuitively understand. There were family dinners where business was discussed in code. There were social events where his behavior reflected not just on himself, but on the entire Gordy brand. There were professional decisions that couldn't be questioned because they came from family. The pressure was constant and contradictory. He was expected to be grateful for the opportunities his marriage had created, but not so grateful that it undermined his artistic credibility. He needed to be successful enough to justify the family's investment in him, but not so successful that he became too independent to manage. He was supposed to be part of the family, but also remember his place within the hierarchy. Anna served as both his guide through this maze and his monitor. She understood the family dynamics better than anyone, could interpret Berry's moods, anticipate his reactions, navigate the politics of Motown's executive offices, but her loyalty was ultimately to her family, not to Marvin. When conflicts arose between what was best for Marvin's artistic development and what was best for the family business, the business won. This became clear during the recording of What's Going On in 1970. Marvin had written a socially conscious album that addressed war, poverty, and social justice, themes that made Berry Gordy uncomfortable. Anna initially supported the project, But when Berry expressed strong opposition, she quickly fell in line with family thinking. Maybe he's right, she told Marvin during one of their heated arguments about the album. Maybe you should stick to what you do best. The betrayal was subtle but complete. In that moment, Marvin understood that his marriage had never been a partnership of equals. It had been an acquisition, and like all Motown acquisitions, it was subject to management decisions made by people who prioritize profit over art. The isolation of success. The more successful Marvin became, the more isolated he felt. His hits topped the charts, his concerts sold out, his face appeared on magazine covers. But each achievement felt hollow because he could never be sure if it was earned through his own talent or granted through family connections. Other Motown artists treated him differently, knowing he had access to information and influence they didn't. Some were resentful, others were calculating, hoping to use their friendship with him to advance their own careers. Genuine relationships became difficult to maintain when every interaction was colored by the power dynamics of the Gordy family structure. Even his relationship with Anna became strained by the contradictions built into their marriage. She loved him, but she also saw him as a reflection of her family's success. She wanted him to be happy, but not if his happiness threatened the stability of the business empire her brother had built. She encouraged his artistic ambitions, but only within carefully defined boundaries. The house they shared became a beautiful prison, decorated with expensive furniture, filled with awards and gold records, staffed with household help. It was everything Marvin had once dreamed of owning. But he felt like a guest in his own home, careful not to disturb arrangements that Anna had made, walking quietly through rooms that felt more like museum displays than lived-in spaces. Late at night, when Anna was asleep, Marvin would sometimes stand at the window looking out at the Detroit skyline, wondering what his life might have looked like if he had made different choices. If he had struggled longer as an independent artist, if he had accepted smaller successes in exchange for greater freedom, if he had married someone who saw him as a person rather than a project. But these thoughts led nowhere productive. The choices had been made, the contracts signed, the marriage consummated. There was no going back, only forward through a life that felt increasingly predetermined by other people's decisions. The breaking point. The marriage began to deteriorate in the early 1970s as the contradictions that had always existed beneath the surface became impossible to ignore. Marvin's artistic success with What's Going On had given him a taste of creative independence that made the restrictions of his personal life feel unbearable. Anna's control, which had once felt like protection, now felt like suffocation. Their arguments became frequent and bitter. Anna accused Marvin of being ungrateful, of forgetting how much the family had done for him. Marvin accused Anna of never seeing him as anything more than an extension of Gordy family interests. Both accusations contained enough truth to make them devastating. The breaking point came during a dinner party at Berry Gordy's mansion in 1973. The guest list included Motown executives, Detroit business leaders, and political figures. Marvin was expected to play the role he had perfected, the charming, successful artist, grateful for his opportunities, a credit to the Gordy family name. But that night, something snapped. During a conversation about the music industry, one of Berry's business partners made a dismissive comment about artists who bite the hand that feeds them. The comment wasn't directed at Marvin specifically, but he heard it as a message, a reminder of his place in the hierarchy. "What if the hand that feeds you is also the one that chokes you?" Marvin asked quietly. The room went silent. Anna shot him a warning look, but Marvin continued. "What if success comes at the price of your soul? What if everything you've achieved was never really yours to begin with?" Berry Gordy's expression didn't change, but his eyes went cold. "I think somebody's had too much to drink." Marvin stood up from the table, looked around at the faces watching him, and walked out of the house. Anna followed, catching up with him in the driveway. "What the hell was that?" she demanded. "That was me," Marvin replied. "Remember me? The person you married before you decided to turn me into someone else." Anna's face hardened. "The person I married was grateful. The person I married understood what he owed to this family." "And there it is," Marvin said. "What I owe, not what I've earned, not what I've contributed, but what I owe. Like I'm still paying off a debt for the privilege of loving you." That night, Marvin didn't come home. He checked into a hotel downtown and spent the next 3 days alone, thinking about the last 10 years of his life, trying to figure out how he had become so completely lost inside someone else's vision of who he should be. The unraveling. The marriage limped along for several more years, but the illusion of partnership was destroyed. Anna and Marvin lived parallel lives in the same house, polite strangers who shared a bed, but not much else. The love that had once existed between them was buried under layers of resentment, disappointment, and mutual recognition that they had both compromised essential parts of themselves for the sake of maintaining a relationship that no longer served either of them. Marvin threw himself into work, recording albums that grew increasingly introspective and dark. His music began to reflect the psychological cost of his success, the isolation of living a life designed by committee, the spiritual emptiness of achievements that felt hollow. Anna retreated into family business, spending more time at Motown offices, taking on more responsibility for managing other artists, building her own power base within the organization. She had learned from her marriage to Marvin that relationships within the music industry were ultimately transactions, and she became very good at managing those transactions. The divorce proceedings began in 1975 and dragged on for 2 years, becoming increasingly bitter as lawyers fought over assets, royalties, and custody arrangements. The case attracted media attention, with headlines focusing on the financial aspects of the settlement rather than the human cost of the marriage's failure. But the real damage wasn't financial. It was psychological, spiritual, existential. Marvin emerged from the marriage and divorce process fundamentally changed, no longer the hopeful young man who had seen Anna Gordy as his ticket to a better life. He had learned that success could be another form of slavery, that love could be weaponized for control, that family could be a prison as confining as any cell. The lifelong echo. For the remaining years of his life, Marvin carried the psychological scars of his marriage to Anna Gordy. Every subsequent relationship was colored by his fear of losing his independence again. Every business decision was filtered through his hard-won understanding that success often came with hidden costs. Every song he wrote contained echoes of the internal conflict between the person he wanted to be and the person others needed him to be. The irony is that his greatest artistic achievements came from processing this pain. Albums like Here My Dear, which dealt explicitly with his divorce from Anna, were raw, honest, and emotionally devastating in ways that his earlier, more commercial work had never been. The suffering that had resulted from his marriage ultimately became the source material for some of the most powerful music of his career, but the cost was enormous. Marvin never fully recovered his sense of self-worth, never stopped questioning whether his achievements were genuine or manufactured. The success he had gained through his marriage to Anna Gordy felt tainted, and he spent years trying to prove to himself that he could succeed independently of Gordy family connections. The marriage had given him everything he thought he wanted: fame, fortune, respectability, access to the highest levels of the music industry. But it had taken away the most important thing: his sense of who he was as an individual, separate from the roles others had assigned him. In his final years, struggling with addiction and depression, Marvin would sometimes talk about the young man who had married Anna Gordy in 1963, as if that person were someone he had once known but lost touch with. The optimistic, ambitious artist who had believed that love and success could coexist without compromise. That person had died slowly over the course of 14 years, killed not by any single traumatic event, but by the gradual erosion of autonomy that came with living inside someone else's definition of success. When Marvin Gaye was shot and killed by his father in 1984, the tragedy seemed sudden and shocking. But those who understood the psychological journey that had begun with his marriage to Anna Gordy recognized it as the final chapter in a longer story of self-destruction, the inevitable result of a man who had never fully recovered from losing himself in the pursuit of everything he thought he wanted. The golden chains had never been unlocked. They had simply grown heavier over time until they became too heavy to carry any longer. And in the end, the question Marvin had asked himself in the bathroom mirror on his wedding day, "Who am I now?" remained unanswered, because the person he had become was never really his choice to make.